Cool. Kia ora everyone, na mihi nui ki a koutou kua hui hui mai nei I tēnei ahi ahi. He karakia kia tātou. Whiti o rā ki te whai ao ki te ao marama, whiti ki runga, whiti ki raro, e nunu ki te pohatu, e nunu ki te rākau, tītaha ki tēnei taha, tītaha ki tērā taha, tihei mauri o rā. Mihi atu ki te tangata whenua o te rohi ne, he tiaki ina hai ka o konei. Mihi atu ki a koutou, na kaitiaki o te kaupapa parakore o Aotearoa, na mihi nui ki a koutou. Kia ora everyone, welcome to this Zero Waste Network webinar about the Transforming Recycling Program and proposal on the table from the government. We have got the awesome duo of Liam Prince and Sue Coutts with us today to discuss the two aspects of the proposal. So about 2 weeks ago, we had a great webinar talking about container return schemes, which is also part of this proposal. But today we're going to be talking about the other two elements of that, which are really the curbside standardization stuff and the organics stuff. So I just want to encourage everybody to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to know who is here. If you're not already subscribed to the Zero Waste Network regular monthly newsletter, we encourage you to flick me over your email address. Happy to add you onto that so you can stay up to date with the Zero Waste Network. And there will be plenty of time for questions at the end of both of the Sue and Liam's kōrero. So feel free to save your questions for then or post them in the chat. So either way, but I'm going to hand over to Liam first, I think, to talk about what some of the opportunities are for submitting on this proposal. So kia ora and thanks, Liam.
Kia ora, Val, and kia ora koutou. Thanks so much for coming here today, spending some time with us. As Val mentioned, we're just going to be talking about part 2 and part 3 of the proposal, the Transforming Recycling consultation. There is, as Val mentioned, the recording of the CRS discussion, which we'll put in the chat if you missed that one. But we're not going to be talking about CRS today at all. But we're really keen to hear your thoughts as well as share our own. So just before we get into our thoughts on the consultation, I'll just share my screen. So just to take you through how to submit and then some resources to help you, add some ideas to your submission as well. So first off, here we have the Ministry for the Environment website that just has all of the links and all of the information about the consultation, a bunch of documents summarizing. There's also webinars that I'm sure many of you have been to that they were recorded and they're up here as well. But here's where you make your submission. You can make a quick submission. If you've only got a few minutes or you don't want to answer all the 70 odd questions throughout the whole consultation, you can just do a quick submission. It takes you to this page and oh, whoops, sorry, that's the webinar. That's the webinar one. My Zoom thing is in the way. So if you come over here to this is the quick submission page, and it just takes you through. You can choose whether you just answer part 1, part 2, part 3, or all of them. And there are much fewer questions than there are in the full submission. But the full submission, again, that's over here. You can, on that main ministry page, you can click through to it. And again, you just come down and that's, again, 73 odd questions. You answer all of them. And if you want to have your full say, if you want support with some ideas for what to actually put in your submission. So we've got our Zero Waste Network draft submission available. So this is a draft submission, so it is still a work in progress. It's kind of the best we've got for now. We'll probably still be working on it up till the deadline, so bear that in mind. But we're really interested in your thoughts on it too. So please feel free to comment on the submission. And obviously today we're keen to hear your thoughts as well. We're going to present our ideas, but they are from our perspective, and they might not necessarily fit with where you're coming from. So you're welcome to use the ideas in our submission and tailor it to your own perspective as well. And finally, I just wanted to point out the rubbish trip, another project I'm involved in. So we've just created a page that has a collection of all of the resources and all of the links relevant to this particular consultation. So just a useful kind of landing page with a whole bunch of links, what to do, where to go. So that's just a useful page to have. So anyway, that's the basis of how to make your submission. I'll stop sharing my screen now. And I think actually just before I pass on to Sue, also another good thing is actually just having these conversations about these ideas, in the places that you work is a really cool idea too. So, with your colleagues and customers, if you run an enterprise, community recycling center, composting enterprise behavior change program, great place to talk about these conversations and encourage people to submit as well. We're really keen to have a lot of different perspectives and a lot of submitters on this consultation, and also letting local politicians and also councillors know what you think about these proposals, because a lot of these proposals are going to affect what your local council does around waste, and in fact we'd encourage you to keep tabs on what your local council is doing in this space. There are a lot of waste minimisation and management plans that are being developed at the moment or soon to be developed. And it's another good opportunity to have these ideas kind of input into that local process as well. Cool, so I will now hand over to Sue, who's actually going to summarise what is being proposed in part 2 and 3 of this consultation.
Kia ora koutou. Yeah, thanks very much for spending your lunch hour with us. It's awesome to see you here. And it's really, like Liam says, it's really interesting. If you feel like you've got a different point of view to what we're putting forward, please speak up, because it's really great to hear everyone's thoughts on it. I guess what we see these proposals, and they've come out of a certain backstory. So we've had, for a long time in New Zealand, we've been talking about whether or not our recycling systems are really delivering the sorts of things that we really want them to. There's been people saying, well, we want to get better quality of material coming through. We want to get more recycling coming through. We want it to be easy and convenient for people. Some people are quite confused about what goes in, what stays out. And we also want to meet the specifications for international and domestic markets for products. And that really affects both organic materials flowing through the system and all the dry recycling type materials flowing through the system. The same sorts of criteria apply to both. And we've seen the government doing a bit of background work on, different instruments, policy instruments that they could put in place that will help us to shift our recycling systems. These proposals that are on the table, like Liam said, one part of it, the puzzle, is a container return scheme, and that's a form of product stewardship which helps to shift the cost of recycling for beverage containers off the ratepayer and the council and onto the producer and the consumer, who are the people that theoretically benefit from the sale of the product. Part 2 is about improving household curbside recycling, and part 3 is about the idea that we might want to get businesses to separate out their organic material as well. And so this proposal really, some of the big questions for us is, how does it really fit in with our ambitions as a country to shift towards circular economy? We, these proposals all sit very low on the hierarchy. They're really about, how do we do better recycling? Maybe the case for organics is really a bit of a higher order thing, where we're going, how can we get organics back into our soils so that we can keep on growing and producing good quality agriculture and horticultural products? But a lot of the recycling stuff is really about single-use containers and about putting, how can we get a better recycling system to capture these things? So while it's easy, I guess what we noticed in our conversations, it's very easy to get sidetracked off onto the existential sides of, really, is this the best place to focus our energy? one of the things we do need to do is to acknowledge that that's where these proposals are at, and just try to make sure that these are the best proposals that can go forward. But also it's one of our jobs is to see them in context always, and to understand how they fit into the strategic picture for everyone going forward. How are they going to help to serve, how do they help us to deliver on some of our longer term goals as a society? And the missing piece for us always is around the economic story. Where's the money going to come from? How the money flow is going to work so that this work is enabled in the long term? Because as you'll know, if you're a local council or community organisation, you're often taking on a job which there's no obvious revenue stream for in the short term, in the long term maybe. So that's a piece that we really think needs to be clarified. So in part two, there's 6 proposals that government has on the table in order to try to get our curbside systems working better and capturing more material. There's 2 kind of overarching ones. One is a proposal to collect a standard set of materials through all of the curbside systems. And another one is that all urban populations should have access to food scrap collections. So that's a new thing, and it's really tied into the idea that obviously we want to get that organic material going back around through good composting systems and back into the soil. But there's another story which relates to the emissions reduction plan. And a big piece of the emissions reduction goals for New Zealand is to reduce methane emissions from landfill. And food scraps going into landfill are generators of methane. So that's one of the big drivers for the change. Then there's 4 supporting proposals, and they are related to things like reporting requirements. So obviously we don't have very good data in our industry on what's coming through. Some of that is because different people collect different pieces of the data, and not all of it makes it through to the final collection point. So government's proposing that private sector also contribute data to the picture. That we should set targets or performance standards for our curbside recycling systems. And so those, lots of different people have different thoughts about, how realistic the targets are that are in the document. It'd be good to discuss that. Should glass and or paper or cardboard be collected separately? So how should we stream the material that's coming through curbside? What degree of separation should we have? And what makes the most sense to put together in terms of getting an effective and efficient system while still maintaining good quality materials? And then should all urban, not everyone has access to curbside, and the questions on the table, should everyone have to have access to curbside in urban populations of over 1,000 people? So those are the 6 proposals in part 2. And then there's part 3, which is the imposing a requirement to separate business food waste or food waste from commercial or business sources. And that really fits with some of the other organics aspects under proposal 2 in the part 2. So Liam's going to talk a bit about that, and then I'll come back around and I'll talk about the other 5 pieces of the puzzle. So we're going to shift, and we're going to look at the organics pieces out of the part 2 and part 3 now, and I'll hand back to Liam so that he can just talk you through that.
Thank you, Sue. So I'm just going to talk about the food waste proposals from part 2 and part 3 together. Even though part 2 is around kind of residential curbside collections and part 3 is about businesses being required to separate. There really is just so much crossover between the 2 sections that I think I'll just talk about them together. And I'm going to summarize the key points we noticed in the consultation. And I'll talk about particular questions here and there, but the points don't necessarily correlate to exact questions. It's often the way with these consultations, you have to try to sort of squeeze your ideas into the narrow specifics of the consultation. So really it's up to you how you might integrate these points into your answers if they do resonate. But I'll just point out that question 41 and question 68, which are they're just the first questions of each of the organics bits. They're quite broad. And so it's a really good opportunity. If you want to make some high level kind of broad sweeping statements, those are a really good place to do that. So that's question 41 for the food waste collections and 68 for the business separation bit. So just to get into our main bit. So the first point, I've got 4 main points to share. So the first point is, government is proposing that councils have a standardized food scraps collection curbside service, and that might look like a small food scraps bin alongside the recycling and residual waste collections. Now, our issue with that is really that's just a one-size-fits-all solution, and it may not be the best system for any given situation. You know, for one, they typically involve large amounts of trucking and transportation, and therefore there are more emissions compared to keeping it local, and they also are very costly to implement. But the other thing I'm really concerned about is that if we're requiring this one type of curbside collection, then that means different types of systems and services might not get a chance to get set up and running. And existing services that look different to that curbside collection could be undermined as well. So what we want to see instead is some flexibility so that a diversity of systems can be considered. You know, we'd prefer that the government just focus on the outcome of diverting food waste from landfill, but they didn't predetermine the way that, you know, that outcome is achieved. You know, we've got different types of organic waste, different local circumstances, different geographies, different community needs and aspirations. And, you know, so that all means we should have a variety of different methods on the table. Like, for example, home and neighborhood composting might work well in some areas, and that might mean a collection is not needed at all. Drop-offs or even on-site composting might be a better solution for, you know, central city housing complexes or office blocks. And there might also be an important role for resource recovery centres as a drop-off point, and that's particularly the case for green garden waste. And there's a question along those lines in particular. So again, just that first point, we suggest that the government requires the outcome of separating and diverting food waste from landfill, but there's actually flexibility built into that. So how the outcome is achieved is up to each community. Now, the second point we noticed, and it's connected to the first point, and this is that small to medium scale processes are just being totally overlooked as a critical part of the future system. The consultation seems to imply that very large scale centralized processing facilities are really the only way to deal with widespread food scraps collections. The consultation document states that we'll likely need 9 new large facilities and 4 small facilities across Aotearoa. So that's all. And there's also a question number 48 that provides a list of large-scale composting facilities that currently have capacity and resource consent to take food scraps, and they're looking for others. But what all of this does is it overlooks the role that small and medium scale processing facilities could and should play in helping to divert food waste from landfill and return organics back to the soil. There are many Zero Waste Network members who deal with food scraps at the small and medium scale, and they are showing how well the system can work at those scales. And with appropriate support, these types of systems can scale out and replicate across suburbs, across towns and cities, to be part of like a decentralized network of processes. And in that way, they can suit the local community needs and aspirations. There are also other advantages to having small and medium scale processes over just large scale facilities. Less transportation, they are simpler and easier to set up. They often create more jobs. Better quality and contamination control, and also you have more resilience and flexibility through a network of multiple options, and there are other points too. Now, we're not suggesting that small to medium scale facilities means that there will be no need for large scale facilities. Again, you know, with different circumstances, different streams and types of organic waste and different quantities are going to require different systems and scales, but we want to see how all of these sit together in a wider ecosystem of options. The thing is, though, that the small to medium scale systems, they are going to need dedicated support and policy, because currently all of it is geared towards large scale systems. So we'd like to see a bit more of prioritization on that too. Third point is that, as Sue mentioned earlier, the primary driver for the government for diverting organic waste from landfill, above anything else, is to reduce landfill emissions. Now, of course, this is really important, but from our perspective, it is only one of many reasons why we would want to divert food waste from landfill. We feel that if we're deciding what we do with organic materials, then we should also be looking at you know, soil and ecosystem health, and also the food system as a whole. So for us, this is really important. as a way of adhering to the waste hierarchy and understanding the role of organic materials in a circular economy, because it's not just enough to stop doing the bad stuff, which is landfilling organics, but we need to think about what's the good thing that we put in its place, and how do we regenerate natural systems and put organic materials to their highest and best use. So as a way of bringing those high-level ideas down to some concrete proposals, we want to see the government set measures and targets on a wider range of issues other than just diverting from landfill. So it could be things like preventing food waste and emissions at source. It could be measures to restore and enhance soil health, about sequestering carbon in soil, about job creation, about the uptake of products like compost and worm castings to support regenerative agriculture, so that they can be more self-reliant. And also boosting local food production for local markets. And that's just a bunch of suggestions of things that could be taken into account beyond just diverting from landfill. And actually, one key thing we think government should focus on is compost quality. And so we would like to see some standards and measures developed that cater for rating and certifying compost quality, not just in terms of being free from contaminants, but also the biological and nutrient profiles of compost, the water retention capacity, the carbon content, and other things like that. Part of that compost quality is to do with what is accepted in the feedstock. And so in that sense, we are supporting the government's cautious approach about limiting what is accepted in the collections. So that's no packaging and paper and cardboard and stuff like that. But again, this is why we're advocating for local scale, small to medium processors to be a part of the solution, because they're often more able to control quality and contamination, as well as the other benefits I mentioned earlier. And the final point around the food waste proposals is around the timeframes. And we think that they can be a bit more ambitious, but it is important to get this right, because if we call for something too soon, if the time frame is too ambitious, then what will likely happen is there'll be a frantic scramble to come up with a solution. We'll probably get some really bad decisions and investments in solutions that lock us into a really bad way of doing things. So we don't want that to happen, but obviously we do want to divert food waste from landfill as soon as possible and put it to highest and best use. So what the government is proposing at the moment is that councils that are within 150 kilometres of an existing large-scale facility, they'll have until 2025 to get a system in place, and all other councils further away than 150 k's will have until 2030. So once again, our feeling is that if we actually considered a wider range of local scale options in a decentralised network, as part of the mix, then we could increase our ambition and get things going faster than the 2030 deadline. The issue is because, just looking at large-scale facilities, they often take many, many years to get set up, to find the appropriate site, to go through resource consent, to be constructed, although there are some large-scale options that are quicker than others to get set up, as I'm sure Mainoki can attest to. But with smaller facilities, they can get up and running much quicker, and it can happen simultaneously as well. You don't have to just wait for one facility for one whole area. So we would like to see the government's phase-in idea around the timeframes to extend to a wider range of options, just to get things happening more quickly. So those are the 4 key points around the organic stuff. Again, if you want more detail around that, they're in our draft submission, as well as other points. So please do get into that. But just to summarize those 4 key points, the first one is we want to see a wider range of options for capturing food scraps beyond just standardized curbside collections. Number 2, we want to support and prioritize local scale, small to medium processing facilities as a critical part of the processing infrastructure. Number 3, we want to see a wider range of measures and targets developed that achieve outcomes in soil health, food resilience, emissions reduction, carbon sequestration, compost quality, and so on. And number 4, we want to increase the ambition of the timeframe by supporting a more creative and diverse range of approaches to capture and process organics. Cool, so that's me in terms of the food waste stuff. I'll now hand back to Sue to talk about the other parts of part 2. And also please feel free to put in your questions and thoughts in the chat, and keen to hear from you later as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Liam. It's awesome being on these webinars because I always learn something from my co-presenter when I'm here. Okay, so I'm going to run through the other 5 kind of questions in the part 2 section. So the first one is, should we collect a standard set of materials across the board through curbside recycling systems? And pretty much everyone agrees that that's a good idea. It's a good idea because it means that it's easy for everyone to understand what goes in. And it's also a good idea because it gives packaging users a good set of they can understand what's likely to be able to go into curbside and what's likely not to be accepted. That helps them make good choices about what they're going to put their products into. We think there should be a standard set of materials. We agree in general with the materials that are listed in the document. We think that there's a gap, though, in that commercial collections from SME and hospitality type businesses generally contain all the same sorts of materials that the domestic collections contain. They also end up at the same MRF. So generally the commercial streams and the domestic streams are mingled at the MRF, and they, we think the same set of rules should apply to the commercial collections as well. Otherwise, you're just going to bring a whole lot of nice, clean material off the household collections, mix it with all the material which has got no rules or constraints from the commercial collections, and you're going to have all the same issues with your MRF. So we think that that's a little bit of an oversight, not really thinking through that side of it. Obviously, there's big industrial kind of streams, which are often single material flow coming out of big commercial or industrial facilities, but what we're talking about is those back of house, office, school, small to medium enterprise, hospitality type businesses, which have basically the same kind of materials as a household. We think that it's good to regulate. There's a really good reason why it's a muddle at the moment, because everyone has their own opinions. Everyone gets influenced by different people to think different things. What makes sense in a small rural community isn't necessarily the same thing that makes sense in a big urban centre. And so we really do need someone to go, okay, we're going to make a call on this. We're going to set a clear set of rules. And so we do agree that regulation is important. And there needs to be a common approach to what's collected. There also needs to be a common approach to how the data is collected and presented across the board so that we're getting consistent figures. One of the things that we've noticed is being quite a discussion and a debate about in the which materials should be included is Tetra Pak and liquid paperboard type products. They are obviously included. They have been included in the list of materials that are accepted in the container return scheme, but they're not going to be accepted through curbside under the list that the MFE has put forward. We think there's a good reason for that, because as I understand it, if you have Tetra Pak and liquid paperboard containers going into a mixed stream of recycling, they go into a compactor truck, they get squashed, and then they just come out at the other end, go through the processing facility reading as paper and cardboard, and they're a contaminant of paper and cardboard streams. So if they go into the big MRFs, they're just going to end up as a contaminant of a good recycling stream, and that's a really good reason, we think, for leaving them out. We think that if they they are part of the container return scheme and they have a deposit and they have a processing fee, and they also have a really good option for a long-term end use, a sensible end use, then it makes sense to put them into the container return scheme, because they can be separately harvested and they can go as a clean raw material source onto the next end use. It's a complicated issue, and be interested to hear what other people have to say about that. But in simple terms, that's, the basic argument. I think one of the tricky things with curbside is that a lot of packaging manufacturers have agreed to put their products into 100% recyclable, reusable, or compostable packaging by 2025. And the easiest and quickest way to do that is to have your packaging be able to go through the curbside system. It's basically a way of free riding on a system which has been set up, a public good system that's already been set up. And one of the useful things that the container return scheme does is it introduces that product stewardship fee, that scheme fee, which covers the cost of the material moving through the system. And it's, obviously a lot of packaging guys would love to be able to get their products accepted through Curbside because that legitimizes them and gives everyone a good buzz about, oh, great, our material can be recycled. And that's the reason we've had all the problems for the last sort of 10 years since we went for a commingled system, where everyone basically persuaded all the councils, oh, put our thing in, and people ended up just wish cycling and going, oh yeah, if in doubt, throw it in. We're really shifting away from that. We're going, we're only having the things that we know can be recycled effectively, and that's going to give a lot of clarity. So one of the questions they ask is, what should the criteria be if we are going to add new product categories over time? And I think that there's some important things that we need to think about if a new product category is going to be added. So that applies to Tetra Pak or any other new packaging that might come on stream. You're really talking about Curbside doing a job which is lowest common denominator. It's dealing with bulk flows that are all over the country, that are mass bulk flow. You're not really talking about all the little niche products that are coming through that really need a different type of approach. So you're looking at the collection methodology, the processing methodology, the viability, which is kind of the funding and finance model, and you're looking at whether the end use makes sense in circular economy terms are the four things that I'd say you really need to think through. And like I'm saying with Curbside, we're looking at lowest common denominator. So there's a lot of products which are not going to be able to go through there because they're too small a stream. Question number 40 talks about there being a network of convenient places for people to take things which are too small to practically fit into Curbside or too big to practically fit into Curbside. And I think that that's one of the things that isn't really explored in this document, is the relationship between the development of the resource recovery network nationwide and the way that the Curbside changes and the container return scheme changes are being implemented. We really need to do them both together and look at how the overlaps fit. There's an awful lot of products, if you think about it, that don't really fit into a Curbside collection model. As we see new product stewardship schemes coming on stream for textiles or electronic waste or other, household items, it makes a lot of sense to have places you can take things back to. It makes a lot of sense for items that are too small. Like one of the thoughts that they've got in this document is that there might be separate collections for lids. And you go, well, we need to have a system for collecting those lids. We also need a revenue stream attached to the work. And there's also the idea that there are already a lot of sites around the country which could be integrated into this network of places that are convenient for people to go to do all of the new things that we're going to have to do if we want to create a circular economy that's around product stewardship, recycling, reuse, repair, refill, and all of the behavior change activities associated with that, as well as the things that Liam's talking about where do you take your green waste if you don't have a compost bin at home? Where do you take your food waste if you live in an apartment or a multi-unit development with no back garden? So we really think that that's a big missing piece in this story, is how does the resource recovery network that we're trying to develop fit in with these proposals? So question 40 is a good place to talk about that. Should all urban populations have access to food scraps? Liam's talked about that already. We think that private sector should definitely be reporting on any of the recycling that they're doing. We really need to have a good understanding of how flows are working to be able to make good policy. And we think that government needs to clearly set out the format for such reporting. One of the tricky parts of it is that often you have several players in a chain involved in different sections. So somebody's doing the collecting, somebody's doing the processing. So one person has one part of the equation that you use to calculate the diversion rate, another person has another part. So there's going to be a bit of work behind the scenes to coordinate all of those players. But we think that it definitely needs to happen because we have models where local authorities are doing a certain amount and a lot of commercial providers are doing work as well. In relation to targets and performance standards, we do want to see benchmarks in place. We want to see targets for councils to work towards achieving. And there's been quite a lot of discussion in our network around whether or not 50% is an achievable or a high bar. I think that there's going to be a lot of complexity as well when you come in with the container return scheme implementation, because we're going at the same time as you're taking out something which is, you know, a portion from the rubbish side, which is maybe the food scraps, which are often a little bit wet and heavy. You're going to take out a heavy component from the recycling side, which is the glass. And so both sides are going to go down. It may not be that these proposals actually do rocket up the proportion of recycling to rubbish. We might end up in basically the same place. So I think that we really need to work through the detail of that in different places and see what's going to happen. I know each council will have a different scenario in that respect. Somewhere like Timaru, where they already do a collection which is green waste and food scraps, is going to be able to achieve that much more easily than someone that's just doing a dry recycling and a food scraps collection. The next one is, should we have separate streams collected in Curbside? We've got the idea on the table that glass might be able to be collected separately, or that paper and cardboard could be collected separately. And the people that we've talked to around the world generally argue for paper, fiber, paper and cardboard to be kept separate from containers. That would be if you're going to only have two streams, then that makes a lot of sense. We would expect that a large amount of glass would go out of the curbside system and into the container return scheme system, and so that glass component will become much less of a problem in the future. And that's one of the useful things about having container return. And then the last one is, should all urban populations have access to curbside dry recycling? And I think that it comes back to Liam's point about it depends. In some situations it really makes a lot of sense, in others it doesn't. And you might find that it makes a lot more sense in some of the big urban centres where there's a massive amount of people living in multi-unit developments or apartments, that you'll have a drop-off point rather than a curbside system. It might be that in a small community it makes a lot more sense to have a comprehensive resource recovery centre that's, in the town, easily accessible by everybody, that people can bring everything back to, rather than setting up a curbside system where someone's driving for miles to come pick up a small amount of recyclable material. So I think, that question about it depends is, obviously wherever you're from, it's going to be a little bit different. And the last point that I want to make is that question 67 is a really good place to identify or flag research questions that we have in common, that we would really like the government to put on their list of things that they need to explore. One thing we've got on our list is lifecycle assessments, and we see the companies coming out with lifecycle assessments to justify their own products, but it would be really great to have an independent lifecycle assessment to look at all the different products in a relative manner to, are we comparing apples with apples around glass, Tetra Pak, plastic containers, and that would be a useful thing for us all to understand how we're moving towards circularity. And funding and finance models is a big gap as well, where we think there needs to be quite a lot of work done. So it'd be great to hear what sort of research questions people have in their minds. I know for councils, it's been a struggle to do that piece of work themselves, when perhaps you could have a piece of work done at the central government level which applies to everybody and can give guidance or support to everybody. And in the UK, RAP does a good job of that for the councils across the UK. And so I think we really need to start developing that model here. But that's basically it for me. Sorry that a lot of my answers are, it depends, but I think it really does in a lot of these situations, and look forward to hearing people's thoughts and questions.
Kia ora, Sue, thank you. And Liam, both of you, thank you very much for your awesome kōrero, your presentations there and guidance on many of those issues. I just want to open the floor up for questions, for comments, for feedback, for challenges. If anybody's got different ideas about any of the things that Sue or Liam have said. So yeah, just open things up there for people. I guess one critical question is, when does the submission close? So when do people need to have their info? When do they have to have their submissions done?
8th of May.
8th of May, right.
Is there a time? Is there an actual time?
I think it's 11:59 p.m.
Yeah, okay. There you go.
I'm sure there'll be somebody at the ministry, yeah, checking the clock. Yeah. Questions from anybody? No questions. Comments? Feedback? Karen?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks, guys, for all your mahi on this. It's been awesome, and it's really helped us in Nelson to pull our thoughts together, and for the Climate Forum submission. And yeah, you're just great. Thank you.
Cheers, Karen. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
Anybody else?
While there's a bit of a space, I just wanted to, in case I didn't make it clear, because I kind of did forget to say it right at the beginning, is that with the food waste proposals, in general, we are really supportive that this is happening at all. It's been a long time coming. That food waste has been going to landfill for far too long, and it's about time we actually did something about it. So we are overall supportive of the direction that this is headed, of getting food waste out of landfill. We just have some suggestions for making the most of the opportunity here. So yeah, just wanted to make that clear in case we're seeming too critical or something.
Thanks heaps. It was again really useful in just reinforcing Mainoki's thoughts around our submission. There's pretty well most things we agreed to, but obviously we'd prefer to see all the fibre also going into the food scraps, along with any other organic waste and going to the worm farm. It just helps to have a bit larger bin. That's the feedback we're getting from a lot of the collectors, is the small food bins are extremely difficult to deal with, and very costly, because the driver's got to get out of the truck and do what he needs to do, versus a larger bin that maybe has more organic waste in there. It also helps the paper and the fibre helps to suck up a lot of the food moisture, which keeps the smell down and keeps those little white things that come quite often in summer and invade our little food bin in Tauranga here, which much to the horror of my 18-year-old daughter there one morning. So yeah, I mean, we're obviously putting in a submission, as I think, Liam, you saw our little social media post, just trying to encourage people to actually put in their thoughts as well. From our standpoint, for the price of one digester, we could set up 18 sites across New Zealand within the next 2 years. It's very doable. The only thing that really holds us back at the moment is just the amount of time it takes to get a resource consent through the councils, because they literally have no staff. So it's a bit of a problem, but we're just about putting 3 more resource consents, which is fantastic. So look, if it happens to be an option for us, we're there, we're ready. We've set up a trial plant in Tokoroa around the sorting and shredding of certain waste. So we're pretty excited about the potential of where this could go. So yeah, thanks everybody for your support.
Awesome, Phil. Thank you very much. Just a quick question, not that quick, actually from Hannah in the chat, who says, apart from making a submission, how much more effort do we need to put in to ensure that we have diverse food waste processing, etc.? How well formulated are the government's plans to go for a centralized model, do you think? And are there precedents or examples of more diverse approaches to food waste collection that could be compelling for government?
Yeah, well, I think it seems very clear that the centralized model is the preferred approach from government at the moment, and it's so there's an opportunity because of the time frame, I guess, and because although the government sort of says they're not really wanting to, I've heard them say sort of they're technology neutral, so they're not trying to determine how we process the organics, but they are sort of seem to be prioritizing the large scale. But that time frame, that extended time frame, gives us the chance to work with councils. So as I mentioned, a lot of councils are going through the waste minimization and management plan process at the moment, and it's a real opportunity for people to put in these ideas around what are the opportunities for small and medium scale, local scale processes. And again, it's not about replacing large scale facilities, but it's about how they can all work together and how we can get the best outcomes. And one of the interesting things is there are models. There are quite a few models, particularly in Europe, of and there's some models in the United States as well. Of communities and councils that decided to go down this kind of decentralized network model, and has proven really successful. So there's a city in France, in Besançon is the name of the city, where it's purely a very small scale decentralized model where they have compost hubs at the bottom of apartment blocks, and also slightly larger ones in sort of about 12 locations around the city. It's a city of about 120,000 people, and that covers over 70% of the population in terms of having access to a composting hub. So that was successful largely because it was driven by the local council, the local government, rather than just kind of leaving it up to people to decide what to do. So it can work if councils actually get behind this idea. And there are opportunities, even in places like Christchurch, where they already have a facility set up. There are issues with that facility. There have been sort of breaches of the resource consent and odor issues and stuff like that. And so there are opportunities to diversify and to develop systems that work differently and can actually support and kind of narrow what that large facility accepts, so that operates at kind of optimum efficiency, and you have smaller scale processes around the city that can deal with everything else. So yeah, there's lots of models. I'm not sure if I quite answered the question, but yeah, there's lots of models to look at, and happy to share some of those if anyone wants some examples to share with your local council, for example.
Yeah, I think I just had a couple of thoughts as well on that big centralized, long supply chain model has been what's created the problems we have at the moment. We have these issues with long supply lines, long transport, and I think that once you take a step back and start looking at emissions and waste, and then you start thinking about transition to a different type of economy, then it really makes a lot of sense to think about how can we test a lot of different models. If we are just going to have, these 9 gigantic plants all around the country, they're all going to be the same. We're not going to have the diversity. We're not going to have the kind of the innovation or the testing of models against one another to see what works the best. It makes a lot of sense, the strength of mixed economy, or the strength of, basically, here I'm apologist for capitalism now, but the strength of capitalist economy is really around having multiple models happening all at the same time, testing them out, seeing what works, what doesn't work. And it really is useful to do that in a time where you're looking for innovation. We don't know the answer at the moment. It's not like we can say we know the right answer for the future. We're looking for the answers that are going to work for us in the future, but the future is not going to be the world that we're living in now. The future is going to be in a totally different world. And I think that there's a lot of questions around adaptation. We've started to have a very basic conversation at the moment about mitigation and, how do we reduce our emissions? But we really haven't even started to talk about how are we going to adapt to this new climate? How are we going to adapt to the new models of production that we're going to have in the future? And so getting, if you think about organics, connecting, as Liam said, the idea of organics processing with food production, local food production, that's the story that we need to be exploring. It's not the story of some industrial process that we take all the organics away to a factory somewhere and run them through it and end up with some sort of byproduct. It has to be integrated into that story of the future that we want to live in. And I think that's where the decentralized model makes a lot of sense, whether we're talking about energy or whether we're talking about, electricity supply. They're looking at decentralization. Community, development, economic development is really that local economy stuff. And thinking about how do we have services that make sense at the local scale is another really important thing to think through. And the same with like Phil's system. My Noki system is low, it's based on a model which doesn't involve a massive amount of capital to go in at the front end. So, we know from the infrastructure work that's been done in New Zealand in the last couple of years, we don't have the capital we need to be able to build everything we want to build. We have to make some tough choices around that. And so looking at how we can create, low energy, low capital, systems at a local scale is a really important piece of the puzzle. And that's something which is totally missing from this document. So that bigger conversation, go back to Hannah's question, is something that's going to have to happen. And we're all going to have to push quite hard over the next couple of years. We've got local body elections coming up. We've got central government elections coming up next year. And we really have to try to push the dial around this whole centralize everything argument. It's easier for them because they just make one, we're going to have 9 of these. Yep, we've already got them in our mind. It's all sweet. It's a lot harder work to have multiple, complicated world, but that's the one that we need to be really supporting.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks, Liam. There's one question from Abby. I apologize, Abby. I missed this in the chat. Have you any ideas about collecting food waste in public places? And also, do you have any ideas about standardizing, mandating labeling for recyclability? As in the Australasian recycling logo. So there's 2 questions there in the chat from Abby.
I could say something about public places if that's useful. I think that what we've seen with all the public space recycling story has been that wherever that there's a totally unmanaged, unmonitored system, you just get massive issues with contamination. And so there's a good reason why public space bins, public place recycling bins just haven't worked. I think where you have public spaces which are managed like events, we see a lot of really great food waste and other organics recycling at events. Some of that's around compostable packaging, some of it's around the actual food waste coming out the back of the stalls at events like WOMAD or AMP shows or those big facilities. There's a lot of people now who are really good at doing public space recycling at a managed way at those big events. I think the amount that you would get in a public space would be very small volume. If you think about, if you're suggesting putting, say, a compost bin next to your public space recycling bin next to your litter bin down at the local park, I think that would be pretty difficult to manage. But I really think that event-based activity is really possible, and the same with the multi-unit development type stuff or community composting facilities. That sort of stuff is very possible, and so that's kind of a in between. Yeah,
I'll just add to that, Sue, in that I'm involved with a project here in Wellington, Lifecycle, who in the last year have developed a drop-off model, which it is quite sort of tightly managed in that we have 3 hubs. One is in the central city, one is as a community orchard and garden, and one is at our main urban farm site. And people do register to use them, and they sort of, it's people who live locally who, like in the central city, don't have access to green space or whatever to do their own composting. They can drop off, but they get access to a code, so the bin is actually all locked up. And even then, we sometimes have issue with contamination. So just to back up Sue's point that like if it was unmanaged, then just have massive issues with contamination. But if they were tightly managed, then there's certainly a way that they can work, and in some ways, especially around central city, could be more efficient than just having a standard sort of collection model where everyone has their own bin. So there's certainly ways, and people are trying different ways of doing that.
Oh, and there was a second part to that question, to Abby's question, unrelated, ideas about standardizing, mandating labeling for recyclability. So the Australasian recycling logo. Yeah, I guess that's if either one of you have thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think labeling is always complicated. You have to have a lot of agreement back up the chain, you know, through all of the different organizations to be able to get that agreement about how you're going to use symbols and how you're going to use the recyclability claims. I guess that this piece of work is really around saying, how are we going to clarify what is going to go into our systems? All of the containers that go into the container return scheme are going to have to be very clearly labeled as, you know, there's a deposit applies, you can reclaim your deposit by bringing it, you know, it's part of the scheme. So that's a stepping stone towards it. I guess there's a massive in-between zone, which is the greenwash and, you know, kind of pinkwash kind of zone, where people put all sorts of crazy labels onto their products, and it's a bit of a baffling process. I guess that you need the two pieces to go hand in hand. One is you need a clear boundaries around the system that they're going into, and then you need labels which help people to understand whether they're buying things that can go into that system. So, yeah, sorry, Abby, I don't know if that's really a good answer, but the label alone isn't much use, but you need to have the systems tucked in behind it that makes sense as well.
Kia ora, Sue. Thank you for expanding on that a little bit. I think if there's no further questions, we're going to close up for the day. I think those were some really useful comments and questions there at the end, and really appreciate everybody being here. We've got lots of different sort of sectors represented. So I just want to take the opportunity to thank Sue and Liam and everybody on the call for being with us today. Encourage everybody to get your submissions in by the 8th of May. And I will just close with a karakia that I will post in the chat there. If anybody knows it, you're welcome to follow along. Kia ora anō. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te oru tapu nui, kia wātia, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua, i te ara tangata. Koe ara e rongo, whakaere ake ki runga, kia tina. Tina. Huie. Tai kie. Nā mihi nui ki a koutou. He atona wā.
Kia ora.